I'd first like to take a few seconds here to just thank everyone for joining us today. In today's workshop, we are going to be covering the topic of how employers assess you. This is a topic that a lot of students, a lot of individuals in the job market don't spend really enough time looking into. There tends to be a rush around how to create a resume, how to get it out to employers without really breaking down the initial pieces of what employers are actually looking for in you and how you can show it to them. So along with me today is Acadiate's co-founder, David Murdoch.
Good afternoon.
And first, we're going to start with a quick introduction to who we are and why we're bringing you information on this topic. So we are experts in talent marketing and digital portfolios, and we've actually been doing this for over 10 years, working directly with employers and students on the topic of talent marketing. So that means we're in regular contact with recruiters that represent tens of thousands of new graduate hires. And what we've been able to do with all that insight is actually create an approach that can lead to a 3 times improvement in employer assessment of you, according to survey recruiters. So what I want to do today is in this workshop series, we are going to be giving you some insight into what our approach is, how you can leverage it and use it to make improvements to your own talent marketing. So we are also used at leading universities like the University of Toronto, Norwich University, Brock University, amongst others. So that's a little bit about who we are at Acadiate. The next thing I want to get into is today's workshop. So we are going to be putting on a workshop. We've gone through the introduction already, and how we're going to structure this. We're actually going to put you in the shoes of a recruiter and take you through the different stages of the recruitment process and help you understand how you are actually assessed at each stage along the way. So the workshop will give you a better framing of how to view the job market, and using the framing, you'll also be able to process your approach to this far more strategically.
So right, and why this is helpful is we're just trying to slow things down and make you more aware of the target that you have, what they're thinking, so you can make adjustments on your side around your talent marketing, and better understand why some of the suggestions that we make throughout this webinar series can dramatically improve your job prospects, typically by 3 times. And where many individuals have told us that it has made dramatic improvements to their competitive edge, often attributing using Acadia to win out jobs where there's 400 or 500 other candidates, new graduates applying for that same job. So it's really meant to give you better self-awareness of what you're getting into, so that you have better ability and understanding of how to make those adjustments that are necessary for you to be successful.
So what we're going to start with the stages of the recruitment process. And the first stage, and we're just going to give you an overview first, but the first stage usually a recruiter has to go through, or an employer needs to go through, is determine the need for a new employee and write a job description. So this is important because at each step of the way, they have different things that they're looking into. An employer doesn't generally hire for the sake of hiring. They do assess that they have a need, they have a problem, and they need an individual person to help them tackle that problem. And the job description is your best source of a summary of what they're looking for and how they feel an individual hire can solve that issue. So then they have to advertise the job description, accept applicants, shortlist for the phone interview, then shortlist for the in-person interview, and finally, after all of these different steps, take the totality of their notes and insight on their candidates and make who they believe is the best hiring decision for the role or the job. So the first thing I'm going to jump into is stage 1, which is determine the need for a new employee and write a job descriptions. So as I mentioned, employers hire to solve problems. And this is something you really have to let this sink in, because there's a tendency for individuals to approach this process from the mindset that the employer is there to solve their problem, which is the problem the employer is there to solve the issue that you don't have a job. And this is fundamentally the wrong way of looking at this. You want to be more of presenting yourself as a solution to their needs and to what they're looking for, because that'll help them have a much better assessment of how you fit. The approach a lot of individuals are taking is, I need a job, so I'm going to apply to 100 different jobs. It's very me focused, and it doesn't usually address the needs as effectively as individuals that are viewing it from the perspective that they want to put together applications that present themselves or position themselves as effective solutions. So to do this, you really want to have the job description be your best indicator of their problems. Every job is different. Every employer is different. You'll even see that a lot of employers will have the same job title and have descriptions that are vastly different. Your ability to read a job description is a major competitive advantage because the majority of candidates don't do this effectively. So our advice is, do not market yourself for a job until you have really studied their job description, and use that job description as your guiding principles for the way you choose to market yourself. So the next stage that we go into from a recruiter's point of view is they then have to advertise the job posting. And from your point of view, what you need to gain insight from this around is understanding where the employer is advertising the job. This can help you understand who else is likely to apply to the job, how many applications or applicants they're likely to get, and helps you better start thinking about the question of, how am I different than the typical candidate? So if it's on a major, massive job board, you can probably assume they're going to get hundreds of applicants. So what that means is the level or the bar to break through becomes that much more difficult. Whereas if it were to be something on a smaller business website or just on a website that you came across, the competition likely wouldn't be as high, and other individuals would likely have a slightly different background. So you really want to be aware of where the job is advertised. And really start thinking about who else is applying to this job. Are people from competing schools applying to this job, people from my own school, and start thinking of that question of, how am I different than all of those candidates? So the next step we go into is the stage 3, which is where they actually start accepting applications. So we say, think of your application as your proposal or your advertisement to the employer that you are the solution to their problems as listed in their job description. So this is something, it's a frame of mind you want to get into, that you're not selling you. You're not selling, me as Zane. I'm not selling Zane the person. I'm selling Zane the solution. And this is an approach that will take a little time for you to get used to, but it is the foundation for why every job application, every resume, every cover letter you do should be tailored and made specifically for the job that you are applying for.
Right, and this is an important point. It's actually where many new graduates make a fundamental mistake in building out their resume, their cover letter, and their job applications. They're often thinking, what is the best me that I can present to any employer? When they should be thinking of, what is the best of me that is relevant for this job that they're interested in? And really taking that thoughts to the next level and making sure, as they build out their resume, cover letter, and their job applications, that they're really starting from the priority list that's driven by the by by the job posting. So, and this is where, again, where a lot of students make mistakes because they're just too focused on themselves. They're very inward looking when they should be driven by that job posting and really put themselves in the shoes of the employer making a decision. Because remember, in the first screening of applications, which can eliminate upwards of 70 or 80% of all candidates, they're only spending between 5 and 15 seconds looking at your application. So they're often making very superficial decisions on how to screen out applicants. When you have hundreds of applications, you have to be that ruthless. So you need to be thinking of how to grab their attention very quickly. So you pass through that first screen and they're willing to look deeper into your application. And the best way of doing that is making sure your messages are very targeted and very on the mark in regards to what they're looking for.
So the other thing you want to do is pay close attention to important dates. Know when the job was posted, know when the job application is due. Our advice is generally to get your application in as soon as possible. A lot of times employers will find the individual that they're looking for and they'll actually close down a job posting even before the deadline. So you do want to get your application earlier than later. As soon as you've allowed it to represent yourself the way you feel is accurate and effective. The other thing you want to look into is make sure you understand what the employer is asking for in your application. So what that means is make sure your application includes all the elements they've asked for. So if they ask for a cover letter, if they ask for a proof of driver's license, whatever it may be, every job is a little bit unique in their requirement, but make sure you follow it to a T. Because a lot of recruiters are sticklers for this. If you don't include the elements they've asked for, it can be seen as a lack of attention to detail. It can also be as very reflective or representative of how you'd be as an employee, not being able to follow simple instructions. So please do make sure you look very carefully at the job requirements and the application requirements. And then only after you've made sure you've hit the mark that they've set, think about how you can go above and beyond that. And we'll go a little bit more into that a little bit later. So the next step after they start accepting applications, they now have a bunch of applicants. Most individuals or most companies that you'll be applying for will likely have over 100 applicants. And the tighter the job market, the more applicants there will be. So for many individuals graduating in May, they may be competing usually with more than 200 candidates for every job they're applying for. So to get through this process, a recruiter, as David mentioned, has to go through extremely quickly and very ruthlessly do a first quick pass on 200 candidates, and they don't have much time, 5 to 15 seconds per candidate, and put aside applications that are interesting. This stage usually hinges on the resume, so you have to be extremely clear-cut and very clean in your messaging. But the recruiter can also see what else your application includes. So they can also see if you have a cover letter attached, if you've got a digital portfolio attached. They likely won't have time to dig into those items at this stage, but they'll know it's there, and that may be something of interest to them to help you get through to that next stage. As David mentioned, 70–80% of the candidates will be eliminated at this first pass. If you make it back past the first pass or the first cut, they'll now take more time to dive into your application. And usually you'll see 1 to 5 minutes on each candidate to shortlist for a phone interview. So it's usually at this stage that cover letters will be read and that digital portfolios will be looked at in more detail. And after this stage, usually 50% or more can be eliminated. So as you can see at each step along the way, and what we're trying to demonstrate to you here is that the assessment criteria and what they're looking for changes at each step. So if you have an incredible digital portfolio, but your resume doesn't hit the mark, you won't get to the point where the recruiter or the employer will be reviewing your digital portfolio. So you want to make sure that the way you structure your portfolios allows you to get through each of these passes. And that's why targeting and understanding the job description is so important, because if you follow the fundamentals of how to read the job description and you apply that to your resume and you apply that to your digital portfolio and your cover letter, it will make it much more likely for you to be able to get past each of these checks. So what are employers typically looking at? The vast majority, and I'd probably say 90% plus of the candidates applying for the jobs you're competing against will be basing their application around the traditional resume and cover letter. The difficult thing for students and new grads is that based on a resume alone, students typically look very similar. They have limited work experience. Their education is usually one of their most employable assets, and their cover letters, they don't have a lot of experience to dive into to give examples from. So it often leaves the recruiter asking a lot of questions around some of the more pertinent things they're trying to figure out about you, things like your skills and your personality. So, what you want to know about the resume cover letter is based on the recruiters that we've surveyed, is the average resume cover letter combination will actually only get you rated a 3 out of 10. And it is because that it leaves so much to be desired for students. As you can imagine, if you had 200 people applying to a job with just resume and cover letter, as a recruiter, it would be very, very difficult to tell the difference. So those little extras, the little things that can differentiate you, is actually what make massive differences for new grad and entry level jobs. So the next thing, the next step up from this is where you want to go into having something like a general digital portfolio. This helps the recruiter know in that first screening that they can dive deeper into you and that you have prepared additional information for them that can help them understand things like your personality or the examples of your work and its quality. So we've actually seen that just by having a good general digital portfolio, you can actually get rated about 2 times higher than individuals that just have a resume and cover letter. But that's not where we want to take you. We actually want to get you to the next step, which is what we call targeted digital portfolios. So the problem with digital portfolios, or general digital portfolios, I should say, is that they can be seen as very time consuming. You typically would have an individual create a website and it would have all of their different projects in it. And simply put, recruiters don't have time to dive into all of that. What a targeted digital portfolio allows you to do is to select and curate the items that are most relevant to the job you want to apply to. And that means you're only presenting 3 to 5 items instead of 30 items. And that focus allows you to actually show up to 3 times higher to surveyed recruiters. So when we did this survey of employers, we actually showed them with the same individual, with the same education, and showed them in these different tiers. And you can see how effective and how quickly you can move from a 3 out of 10 to almost a 9 out of 10 consistently and reliably by following the principles that we're going to be sharing with you.
Right, and part of this, the background behind this in our focus groups with recruiters that represent thousands of hires per year of new graduates is the essence of what they're trying to identify in new grads is potential. Potential and also very strong self-awareness. And self-awareness is one of those interesting subject matters. It's typically defined as individuals have strong self-awareness where they have a good understanding of their strengths and weaknesses, what they can do, what they can't do, typically have a good plan for improving themselves, how to grow themselves, and have a good understanding of what they want to do with their life. And the feedback we have from recruiters is that it's very difficult to assess that from just a cover letter and a resume, and that this can come out more three-dimensionally to them with a web page or a digital portfolio, and in even more so when it's targeted to them, because it shows a lot more to them. And if you can imagine a recruiter going through a long process to identify good candidates to hire somebody, it can be very time consuming and to a certain extent risky if that individual they hire doesn't stick around or doesn't fit. And therefore, as they get through the later stages of the recruitment process, digital portfolios can, in the eyes of recruiters, show passion and interest and alignment with the organization, but also de-risks it for them. So, in the eyes of recruiters, digital portfolios and new media presentations of yourself are playing increasingly larger role in the hiring process. So, your ability to understand this and manage it and manage the artifacts to demonstrate competencies and passions can greatly improve your job prospects.
Absolutely. And what you should see from the images in front of you is to get to that next level. As we mentioned, that first pass, like I said, will go really strongly based on your resume cover letter. Mostly the resume is where they'll make that first pass, but just getting past the first group is not your goal. Your goal is to get the phone interview, and that is where you really want that digital portfolio cover letter and targeted portfolio to put you over the edge so that you can beat out that second grouping of candidates. And we've seen that this is an effective and reliable way to consistently get that done. So stage 5 now is once you get to the phone interview, you now have to beat out the candidates to get to the in-person interview. So this is how they will generally shortlist for that. So the phone interview is actually allows the recruiter to clarify items on your applications and make additional assessments based on your personality and communication skills. The important thing to note here is usually phone interviews are much shorter than an in-person interview, and it's just to help the recruiter get a feel for who you are. Are you the individual they thought you were on your application? So this is where it becomes very important for you on several levels to be prepared for a phone call from a recruiter. And one of the things I'd mention here is some recruiters will schedule the phone interviews. Others will call without warning. And what that means for you is you want to be prepared for that unexpected call. We've had many stories from recruiters of calling candidates randomly, and the candidate will very much blank on the phone. They'll forget, who the employer was, what job it was they applied for. And obviously when that happens on the phone call, it's a quick way to be put aside by the recruiter if you don't even remember the job that you applied for. So this is why it's so important to be well organized in the recruitment process and to be very self-aware and to take the time to apply to each of these jobs and put in the effort, because it'll make it much more likely that when a recruiter calls that you will remember the role, you'll remember how you applied for it, and you'll remember the way you want to position yourself to that recruiter and what the pertinent points of that job are in the phone interview. So the next step is the in-person interview. And the in-person interview is typically where the final hiring decisions are made around. The first point we want to really stress to you about the in-person interview is that the interview should be two-sided. So as much as they're interviewing you to see if you're a good fit, you're also interviewing them to see if they're a good fit for you, right? So you want to be going into the interview with questions and curiosity. And to do that, we found the best way to do this is just to do research on the company, see what they're up to, see what you're interested in, see why you'd like to work there, how you feel you can contribute, and to use your self-awareness to see how your past and your background can help them achieve those things. We also say try to keep the interviews conversational and friendly. They are trying to see if you are a person that they can interact with daily. So a lot of this is if you get called in for an interview, you can usually assume that they've made a call that you have the knowledge or the competency to do the job. Your skill set isn't necessarily what they're questioning as much as your personality and how you fit into the role. So
Right, and I would just a little bit add to that. Yeah, more so with the phone interview, but also with the in-person interviews, is one of the realities that recruiters have to deal with, and it really murkies the water for everybody, is that there's a general belief that 80 to 90% of the job applications they receive are misleading or have outright lies in them. And that on the one hand, they have to trust to a degree the typical job applications that they receive, but they're often somewhat skeptical or cautious. And that's why the phone interview and the in-face interview is important. It's to verify the individual is who they say they are, and not as kind of as an identifier, but as an individual where they saw certain attributes or competencies or background that hit their core profile that they're looking for, and just seeing that the person actually fits. And often, well, one of the things that we've found out from if you look at some of the top software programs that are used by the Fortune 500 companies, they're typically trying to identify and screen individuals based upon fit with an organization. And it's usually kind of four core areas that they're looking for. About 25% is competency. Can you actually do the job? But the other 75% is typically broken down by about 25% is fit with the corporate culture. Another 25% is fit with the actual team you'll work in. And then another 25% is fit with your immediate reporting manager. And this is one of the key things that they're trying to pull out from the interviews is this level of fit, because if there's not a common understanding and alignment of values of your approach to achieving jobs and developing yourself, then you're just not going to fit in the organization. They recognize that in due time you'll leave. They're trying to make longer term hiring decisions. So they're trying to really figure that out. And the more you can show that in your job application and really be careful in building out the documents will also align you well, so you'll be well prepared for the interviews.
Right, right. So based on the way that the interviewing process goes, the recruiters will typically have conversations with other recruiters, the hiring manager, and they'll make a call on who they feel is the best individual for the job. And one of the interesting things for you to know here is the person that is the most qualified for a job doesn't mean they're the one that's going to get the job. It's often a combination, as David said, of all these different factors where they may see one person as more qualified and more technically able to do the job, but they may see another person as having better communication skills and being more friendly, more outgoing, more ambitious, a lot of different personality traits that they identify with, and they want to have individuals with those sorts of traits in their company. So it's important to keep in mind that as you talk about yourself, as you talk about your skills, it's important to really to dive into not just your technical skills, but also give examples of your personality and how that's helped you. When it comes to these three areas within fit within a team, you do want to be prepared with examples of how you fit in with prior companies and how you've embraced their culture, how you've fit in with teams before, and examples of how you've worked with team members and scenarios where you've shown teamwork, and also areas where you've worked with your managers before and how that's worked. So you want to be clear in those areas, because a lot of the interview questions you get will be asking for examples that help them determine how you've handled situations in these particular areas in the past.
Right, and this is quite interesting. This is where you can really separate yourself out. And in a number of the programs that we work with, where the students are graduating in their early 20s and they're applying for their first full-time job, those that really take care and think this through, we're actually finding are winning jobs that require 2 to 3 years of full-time experience. In a number of cases where they're beating out internal candidates with 2 to 3 years experience and winning that job, which is fascinating because and really reinforces that if you're willing to take that extra effort and really think this through and take this level of care, you can dramatically improve your job prospects and your competitive edge. And especially as a new graduate coming out of school, there's often this inferiority complex that, oh, I don't have enough experience. Remember that you can offer a lot of competitive advantage coming straight out of school for these jobs with showing up with stronger potential and stronger fit over other candidates who have more experience, but maybe aren't as good a fit in the eyes of the recruiters. So this is a very important message for you to understand, because it should give you a lot more confidence if you're willing to put the effort in.
Right, right. And just a quick note on effort levels. There's a tendency as well with a lot of students to look for the easy way to do things. And one of the things, we pride ourselves in making this information a lot easier, or giving you a framework that's a lot easier to work with. It's still going to take work to do the research on every job and to get the self-awareness. And you do have to keep in mind that it's never going to be easy to beat out hundreds of other candidates. It's always going to take work, and it's always going to take the right approach and the smart approach, which is what we're providing you with today. So with that said, what we want to do is leave you with some homework, some things to do prior to the next workshop. And I'll get into what the next workshop is, but what we want you to do is to start focusing on just finding one job. And on this job, we want you to read the job description thoroughly, understand every little piece that they're asking for, and then start collecting items for that application. So that can be things like your resume, cover letter. Find some examples of, it could be schoolwork examples, it can be awards, pictures of awards you've had, but find some things that can provide evidence for the things you talk about on your resume or cover letter. And lastly, put together a showcase for the job, a targeted showcase just built around that one job. In the next webinar, we're going to take the work that you've done in creating your first digital portfolio for one job, and we're going to really zone in on it and show you how to reflect on it and show you what steps you need to take to properly choose the assets, how to create branding statements, how to do showcase messaging or digital portfolio messaging, and how to tie this all together so that it's compelling for each and every job that you apply for. Between this webinar workshop and the next one, you will have everything you need to know to look 3 times better consistently. And in the last webinar in this series, we'll take what you know how to do for each job and then show you how to manage this across all your different job applications. So how to track that and how to stay organized in this approach so that you can do it sustainably and do it in a way that you see massive gains in the way recruiters see you across all your job applications. So with that said, that's it for this workshop. We do want to thank you, everyone, for attending, and we look forward to seeing you in the next workshop.
Thank you. Good afternoon.